All right. Good evening. We're going to move back just a little bit to get to the beginning of our topic that we were discussing. So we're going to move just, if you were finishing last night's shiur, we'll move back to Nun Daled Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the bottom. Amar Rabbah. We are discussing this brisa that had the circumstance where we had young meat that when you would cook it, it would expand, and then we had older meat that when you would cook it, it would contract. So we're trying to figure out what is the halacha in these circumstances. So Amar Rabba says, Kol hecha demikara hava bei, any piece of meat that at the beginning it had the right volume, v'hashta leisbei, but it shrinks. And so now it doesn't have the right volume, haleisbei. Look, it can't. There's no size of tuma there.
After you cook it, before you cook it.
It shrinks after you cook it. So now that it doesn't have the size, so then haleisbei doesn't have the size, and so everybody's going to agree that it's tohar from now on. And the kol hecha, like the brisa said, kol hecha demikara lo hava bei, and if you have a piece of meat that originally did not have the size, then you cook it, v'hashta hava bei, and now it has the right size. So midrabanan, that's only going to be rabbinically tummy, because really midoraisa, we're still going to hold that everything goes by what it was. So it wasn't a shear. Now that it's larger, it's just liquid, it's just water that's absorbed in it. But we're going to say midrabanan, it's going to be tameh. That is what everybody agrees. Ki pligi, the argument in the brisa is kigon jahayabo kashir, when it had the right size, v'chazer v'tafach, and then I skipped. V'tzamak, and it shrunk. V'chazer v'tafach, and then it expands again. Demar savar dichui bisur. The question is, when something was at one point able to transmit tuma because it had the right size, and then shrinks. At the moment it shrinks, it can't transmit tuma anymore. But now it expands again. So does it go back to being able to transmit tuma?
Once the tuma is gone, it's gone.
Oh, so that's the question. That we call dichui. We call that dichui. Dichui means that for a moment it's gone. Once it's gone, it's not the same thing ever again. Demar savar dichui bisura. So demar savar yesh dichui bisura. One opinion, Rabbi Shimon and Reish Lakish, they hold like what you just said, Yehuda, that once it is no longer the size, it shrank, so it's not going to be able to accept tuma anymore on a d'oraisa level. It's only d'rabanan. Omar savar, the other one says, ein dichui bisura. What do you mean? It's back to being the same piece of meat. It was large. It got shrunk by being dehydrated, and now it went back to its original place.
When it shrunk to get dehydrated, the tumor would disappear.
The tumor disappears temporarily, and then you add water to it again, or you cook it again, and now it goes back up, and now it's back to the way it was. So that's the argument. The question is, does anybody really hold of such a concept that once it becomes not usur, that it never goes back to being usur again? That's not. We have a Mishnah in Taharos. Kebeitza ochlin, when you have an egg's volume of food, makes it tameh, shehinichan bechama benismatu, and you put it into the sun, as a fruit or some kind of a thing, right? Some plums, and you shrink them. What do plums become when you shrink them? They become prunes, right? They become prunes. They shrink down to less than an egg's volume. V'chein kazayis min hames, or you've got a piece of a kazayis from a corpse, or kazayis min anavela, or kazayis from a body of a dead animal. The kadasha min sheretz, or a barley-sized piece of bone from a barley-sized piece from a sheretz. These are all the sizes that they transmit tuma. The kazayis pigol, the kazayis noser, the kazayis chelev, or you have a kazayis of
that word again?
Pigol and a kazayis of leftover and a kazayis of forbidden fats. Tahorin, so those are all going to be tahor. They're not going to be able to transmit tuma. And you can't be chayav for eating them, pigol noser v'chelev, because they're now smaller in size. However, if you put these pieces of shrunken down foods back into the rain, and now they get larger again, timein, they become tamei again. And now if you eat them and they have the right size, you are chayiv. So therefore, tiyuvdil mandamar yesh dichli bisurin tiyuvda. That proves that nobody holds, that everybody in this brisa clearly says that it's everyone's opinion that when it was shrunk, it lost its prohibition status, but once it goes back to its original size, it goes back to being usher just the way that it was. Okay, so now, Toshma, come and listen. Tormin te'enim al grogros. So now we're going to be discussing the volumes of shrunken. Well, we're going to discuss whether we consider to be something to be the size that it was originally, or do we look at it the size that it is now? So we're going to talk about figs and dried figs. So when I'm taking truma, right, tormin, so I'm taking from the te'enim, I'm taking from figs, ala grogros. I'm going to take figs I've got dried figs, okay? And dried figs, there's more of them that they take up less volume than full figs because figs have water in them and the dried figs have no water in them. So b'minyan. So when I take the truma, I count them, right? I'm going to count 10 full-sized figs for 90 dried figs. Okay? That's what I'm going to do. Now, how come? If we're going to evaluate them based on the size that they are right now, so then we're going to take a look at these figs. We're going to take a look at these figs like they were originally. Sorry, we're going to look at the dried figs like they were originally. So we're going to say that since you're taking figs, full-size figs, for dried figs, you have to take full-size figs. Why? Because the dried figs, we look at the dried figs based on the volume they were before they dried out. So we're going to look at them like the way they were. So then Shapir, I understand. Why are you taking full-sized figs in order to take truma on dried figs? And you're taking them by counting them. So it's 10 full-size figs for 90 dried figs. The dried figs, 90 dry figs, have half as much volume. A dried fig has half as much volume as a full-size fig. Nevertheless, we're going to consider them the same size because dried figs really were once full figs, and therefore we're going to consider them the way they were. But if we're going to say that, no, or you should look at them the way they are now, so you've got way too much figs, because you're going to have double the size of the figs that you're going to need, because you're taking 10 full-size figs, not dried figs, on dried figs. V'tanya, and what's the problem with that? Well, we learned in a brisa, hamarbe b'masros, if you take too much meiser, if you take too much tithes, perusav misukanim, then the produce that you're taking it for, that will work. Meaning, if I've got a orange and I've got 9 oranges here, so then take 1 orange out, that's fine. Well, if I take 2 oranges out, well, that's more than enough meiser than I needed for this pile of oranges, so these pile of oranges are going to be fine. But umasrosav mekukalin, the 2 oranges that I have that I took out to take the tithe, there's going to be too much here. One of those is going to be proper meiser. The other one is unnecessary, and if I donate that one, it's produce that never had tithe taken off, because it shouldn't have been in this. Shouldn't have been meiser by itself. It should have been in the regular pile with truma taken off, with trumas and meisers taken off of it. The fact that I'm now moving it over to my meiser pile, it doesn't become meiser, and now it becomes untithed produce. So it's going to be a problem. So you really can't take off too much. It really could be a problem if I'm taking off too much figs for dried figs. Elamai, so what do you have to say? Lekemos shehain, we're supposed to take a look at how they were. So we're going to take a look at these dried figs and consider them to be fully fresh figs. Okay, fine, I understand that. But ema seifa. Then the next part of the brisa says, grogros al teinim. If I go the other way, I'm taking dried figs and the produce that I'm taking off of is full-size figs. Bemida. At that point, I'm going to go by volume. Now, why? If I'm supposed to be going according to the way they are right now, so then shapir, that makes sense. That's why you're going by volume. The dried figs, by each one of them, I need more dried figs in order to compensate for the full-size figs. So I'm just going to take 10% of the total volume. Well, that's great. But if you're going to say, look, we have to look back at what they were when they were figs. So then, if I take off more dried figs in order to make the right amount of volume, I'm going to be taking off too many dried figs to accommodate for the full figs. Marbe b'meiser, who I'm going to have leftover meiser. And we said, that's no good, you can't do that. Ella, so rather, what's going on here? So Meiser is going to be a problem. If I'm taking off tithe, it's going to be a problem. Ella hacha betruma gedola askinon. The answer is we must be dealing with we're not dealing with Meiser with tithes. If we're dealing with tithes, you need to have the exact number. But if we're dealing with truma gedola is the amount, the portion that gets taken off produce and given to the Kohen. The Torah does not specify the amount that needs to be. So therefore, whatever amount I take off is sufficient. So therefore, I could take off more, I could take off less, it doesn't matter. So now, okay, Reisha, the first part, where it tells me I'm supposed to take off full figs for my dried figs, ba'ayin yafeh. It's telling me that's the best way to go. Because if I'm going to take the number of full figs on the dried figs, I'll be taking off more figs than I need to. And that's a good thing. That shows that you're giving more to the Kohen than you need to. And Seifa, in the end, where I'm taking off dried figs, so instead of going by number, I'm going to go by volume, because again, ba'ayin yafeh, that is the way to take off more tithe, more truma, and that's a good thing to give more to the Kohen. Okay, so that's what's going on. Ihachi, well, wait a second. If you're telling me that we're dealing with truma gedola, we're dealing with the part that is taken off and given to the Kohen, so ema seifa, then let's take a look at the end of this brisa. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Abba hayanotel, my father, Rabbi Yossi, so he would take truma eser gru, he would take eser grogros shebemikzoa, he would take 10 dried figs, which were in the container that they used to put all the figs into dry. They would have called them mikzoa. It was like a basket, but I guess it had plenty of air to be able to circulate so that it would dry well. Al tishim sheba kalkala, and he would take those 10 for the 90 that were in the basket of fresh figs. So now, 1 second. Truma gedola, if we're talking about what you said, that we're talking about giving the amount to the Kohen, Esther, mayavidite, why did he take 10 for 90? That's not the amount of truma that you give to a Kohen. The Kohen, you're supposed to give 1/40th, 1/50th, 1/60th. You don't give 1/10th. So he's got the wrong amounts. Ella hacha betrumas meiser eskinon. So you're right. What we must be dealing with is trumas meiser. Trumas meiser is once you give 10% of the produce to the Levi, then the Levi in turn gives his portion to the Kohen. So the Abba Elazar ben Gomelhu. And this is Abba Elazar ben Gomel's opinion, Detanya, who says, right, that he says that there's no problem when it comes to tithes, to Meiser. Detanya is one in a brisa. Abba Elazar ben Gomel, Abba Elazar ben Gomel says, V'nechshav lachem trumaschem, the pasuk in Bamidbar says that the truma that the Leviim are going to separate to give to the Kohanim, right? Again, tithes, the first 10% goes to the Levi. Then a gift for separation portion from that is what the Leviim give to the Kohanim. So v'nechshav lehem trumaschem is going to be considered to them their truma. So what does that mean? Bishtei trumas hakosef medaber. The pasuk says, it says trumaschem, your trumos, which is a double language. So pasuk is talking about two different types of truma in the same pasuk. Achas truma gedola and truma gedola, right? Both the truma gedola, that's the part that the owner gives to the Kohen, and the trumas meiser, which is the part that the Levi gives to the Kohen. Kishem truma gedola nitelas be'omed. Just like when the owner gives to the Kohen, he can measure it in his own estimation what he wants to. Ube machshava, his own calculation. So kach trumas meiser nitelas be'omed. So too, trumas meiser, the part that the Levi gives to the Kohen, also can be calculated ube machshava, and he can make that visual calculation. Doesn't have to measure it. So ma truma gedola ba'ayin yafeh. Just like when you give truma gedola, you're supposed to give a nice part, a nice portion of trumas meiser ba'ayin yafeh. So too, the trumas meiser should be a nice amount. So therefore, the amount that he was giving was 10%. The way that he gave it, a little bit more, a little bit less, better, a little bit more. And so therefore, they were giving extra dried figs when they were taking off truma for the full figs, and they would take off extra full figs when they were taking it off for the dry figs. The Kohen would get a bigger portion. Basically. Sorry?
You're giving it to him by portion.
You're giving it to him by bigger, whatever the bigger, you're going to give more to the Kohen. But we're estimating at approximately 1-to-10 ratio still, because we're talking about trumas meiser. Okay. Umina, and from what Rabbi Elazar says in this brisa, so Amar Rabbi Elazar bar Yossi, right? Rabbi Elazar bar Yossi said, Abba Hayanot, my father would take Eser Grogro Shemiksoa. He would take 10 dried figs in the Miksoa container on where they were drying the figs. Al Tishim Shabbat Kalkola for the 90 that were in the basket of fresh figs. So if we're going to say that we're going to take a look at the way that they were, so we're going to take a look at these dried figs as though they are full figs. So then Shapir. So then it makes sense because he was taking off more. He was taking off the number of dried figs despite the fact that they were of lesser size. However, if you're going to say that we're going to take a look at the way they are now, he's taking dried figs for full figs. He's taking too little. So, we're going to take a look. According to what Rabbi Elazar bar Yossi seems to imply, it seems to be that we are going to take a look at what they were at the beginning. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. Ki also Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, to Bavel Amar, he said, Rabbi Elazar, Shani, so that Rabbi Elazar said, Shani Grogros, that normally you take off based on what they are now. But dried figs are different. Why? Because dried figs, all you got to do is cook them in water, and they swell right back up, become fresh figs all over again. So therefore, the reason you could take dried figs for the fresh figs is because dried figs really are just fresh figs. They're just dehydrated.
I didn't know you could.
I didn't either. I don't know. Never tried it, but I don't know. We take some raisins and see if you could do it. I don't know.
Raisins will be grapes.
I know. See if we could turn it into a grape again. I don't know. He says figs are different. So it doesn't work, probably doesn't work by raisins and grapes. These figs are different. I don't know, I have to get some dried figs.
Try let me know.
Okay. Okay, so now let's talk about more about this issue of dried figs being taken as truma for fresh figs and vice versa. Tana Rabbanan, we learn in a brisa. Tormin to Einim al Grogros. We could take truma from fresh figs in order to take care of produce that are dried figs. And b'makom shiragilin lasos te'enim grogros, that we can only do in a place that they were turning, generally speaking, they were making the fresh figs into dried figs, v'lo grogros al te'enim. But in that circumstance, you can't take dried figs on the fresh figs. V'afilu b'makom shiragilin lasos te'enim grogros, even if it's a place that they normally made the figs into dried figs. So let's see what's going on here. So let's discuss this brisa. Amar Mar, the brisa says, one line at a time. Tormin to Einim ala grogros. We're going to take the truma on the fresh figs, on the dried figs. B'makom shiragilin lasos to Einim grogros, in a circumstance where they normally make figs into dried figs. So, why is that? So, makom shiragilin in. Since why can you take the figs and take that as meiser for the dried figs? It's only because all the figs are going to turn into dried figs anyway. That's what we do here. Only in a situation where all of them become dried figs. B'makom she'ein regilin lo. But if it's not a circumstance where they're turning all the figs into dried figs, you can't do that because there's two different qualities here. Dried figs are fresher; they taste better. But fresh figs are better and they taste better. But dried figs last longer. So therefore, the fresh figs are going to rot faster. So therefore, if we're in a situation if we're in a location where everybody's drying their figs, so we could take the figs that are fresh are actually worse than the figs that are dried because they're going to go bad faster. But I can use them to take off truma. I could take truma from them using the figs because everybody's going to make them into dried figs anyway. So therefore, even the fresh figs are considered dried figs eventually, and therefore I can take truma for them. So hey chigdami. So what's going on here? Yes.
Dried figs can be rehydrated back to a near fresh state and 50 to 4 hours, depending on the method used. Soaking in hot water, tea, or juice for 2 to 4 hours creates most plump, fresh-like result while simmering for 15 to 30 minutes, or steaming for 5 to 10 minutes works faster. Okay, so there we go. According to Google, so Google says it's true, right? We didn't doubt Rabbi Elazar, but you know. Remember how it worked. It works, okay. Whatever that anyone has to show.
So hechi dummy. So what's going on here? Ida ikka kohen. If there's a kohen that lives in the community, so then makom she'ein rogil amaylo. So if you're in a place that you don't normally dry the figs out, well, why couldn't you just? I mean, the fresh figs are better. You're going to give it right to the kohen anyway. That's not. We were in the Mishnah. Makom sheish kohen torim min hayafe. When you have a circumstance where you have a kohen in the neighborhood, and you're gonna, like if you have no kohen in your neighborhood, you gotta dry out your food so that it'll last, so that eventually you'll give it to the kohen. But if
he's in the desert for however long he needs.
So, but if the kohen lives in your neighborhood, you can give it to him fresh. He'll eat it right now. Right. So why is it that you have to be in a location that they dry or not dry? It doesn't matter. You could just give him the fresh. Alapshita deleka kohen. We must be dealing with we're in a neighborhood where there's no kohen. Okay, so if that's the case, so Ema Seifa, the end says, "V'lo gros alatenim." You're not allowed to take truma on from dried figs on fresh figs. V'afilu b'makom sheragil asos teinim gros, even in a circumstance where they do make the figs into dried figs. Now, v'ideleka kohen. If there's no kohen here on Milo, why not? The dried figs are better because they'll last. So Vatnan, as we were in a Mishnah, Makom Shein Kohen. If there's no Kohen there, Torah Min HaMiskayim. If there's no Kohen there, it's better to use the produce that's going to last. Ella Pshita must be clear. Deika Kohen, there is a Kohen there. So then Reisha Deleka Kohen Vesefa Deika Kohen. What are you telling me? The first case is where there's no Kohen, and since there's no Kohen, it's better for you to give dried figs because there's no Kohen here, and we're going to let you use regular figs in a situation where everybody's turning all the regular figs into dried figs anyway. Okay, so the first case was where there was no kohen, and then the end case we said you can give you can take the dried figs for the fresh figs, right, because there is a kohen there, right?
Maybe the kohen just walked in as it was getting.
Well, but the problem is that the two cases in the brisa, right, are separate cases. And yet they deal with two completely different circumstances. So if the answer is that's fine. You could do that. First case is where there's no Kohen. And then the second case, right, we say that there is a Kohen. And since there is a Kohen, you can't take from the dried figs for the full figs because the dried figs are not as good. There is a Kohen there. So Reisha Deleka Kohen, Vesefa Deka Kohen. That's okay. You could do that. Now, Amar Rav Papa says a very interesting thing, which is kind of a general rule throughout the Gemara. Dachkinon umokminin masnisin betrei tami. It seems that Shmamino, we see from here, Dachkinon umokminin masnisin betrei tami, that we would rather say that two parts of a brisa or a Mishnah follow two different cases, v'lo mokminin betrei tanai, rather than to say, the first opinion goes like one opinion, and the second case goes like another opinion. Because we could have said that also. The first opinion is according to Rabbi so-and-so, and the second opinion is according to Rabbi so-and-so. We don't want to do that. We'd rather say they're all consistent, they're just different cases. And so that's how we establish it. Next Mishnah. Kol ha-menachos niloshos beposhrin. All menachos, so they're going to be kneaded in warm water. Right? Not boiling hot water and not cold water. And then, mishamran shelo yachmitzu, we're going to watch them and make sure that they don't turn into chametz. Ve'im hechmitzu shiareha, if the leftover part, not the kmitza, becomes chametz, so then, over below saseh, you're in violation of a prohibition for allowing your mincha turn into chametz. Right? And the Gemara is going to see where it is. Okay, so now, Shneimar, because Pasuk says, right here, Shneimar, kol mincha asher takriv Hashem, lo se'aseh chametz. All the minchas that you're going to bring close to Hashem, you should not make them chametz. V'chayev al lishasah v'al arichasah v'al afiyasah. Not only are you liable, but you're liable for every step of the process. You're liable when you knead it, and then you're liable when you shape it, and you're liable when you bake it. So you're going to wind up, if you do the full thing and you bake chametz bread out of your mincha, then you're going to get 3 sets of lashes. Okay, says the Gemara. Minani Nili. Where do we know this from? Samar Reish Lakish. Right? Reish Lakish says, Domakro, the pasuk says, because after all, the pasuk says that you're not allowed to make the mincha, which you bring to Hashem, into chametz. That means the kmitza. The kmitza is the part that I take and bring to Hashem, not the rest of the offering. So where is it that the Mishnah gets the rule that the rest of the mincha also can't be made chametz? So the pasuk says, Domakro, the pasuk says, Lo se'afeh chametz chelkam. Right? You're not allowed to bake chametz from their portion. So chelkam, afilu chelkam lo se'afeh chametz. Even the portion that the kohanim are allowed to eat should not be baked into chametz. Now, v'hai lachiyudas, is that what that pasuk is for? Hami bailei lechet. We need that pasuk to tell me, according to the following brisa, lo se'afeh chametz. You should not bake chametz. The brisa explains matam malomar. But what does that mean? What is the pasuk saying? Halo kvar nemar lo se'aseh chametz. The pasuk already told us about the korban mincha, about the kmitza. You're not allowed to make it chametz. So lefish nemar lo se'aseh chametz. If the pasuk had only said you shall not make it chametz, yochel lo yehei chayev ela achas al kulam. If you made the dough and you kneaded it and you shaped it and you baked it, you're only going to be liable to one set of lashes for the whole bit. Tamid lomar lo se'afeh. Therefore, the pasuk says, don't bake it. Afia bichlal haisa. Baking is part of the process. I don't need you to give me a separate prohibition for baking. Lama yatas. So why does it specify specifically the baking? Lahakish leha, in order to make a connection to it. Ma afia miyuchedes shi mase yechidi. Just like baking is one action, it's an independent action. V'chayav and Allah b'fnei atzma. If you do just that action, you're going to be liable. Afani avi. So too, if I knead it or I shape it or any other independent action in order to make this bread, so it's going to be liable for lashes. Lisuye kituf, and that's going to include the smoothing out of the top of the bread before you bake it. Right? That's not really an action. Shehu masi yechidi, but it's an independent part of the process. Chayav and Allah b'fnei atzma, you're going to lashes just for doing that. Okay. So therefore, you see that this pasuk lo se'afeh chametz is already used. So anan mi chelkam kamrinon. We're saying from the word chelkam, right? Lo se'afeh chametz. The word chelkam is written in that section. The word chelkam is telling me that's the portion that the kohanim are not allowed to eat. The rest of it, when it's chametz from there.
Which portion of chelkam? What about that?
When you have your whole mincha offering and you take one scoop out, that's your kmitza. The rest of everything that's in the bowl, that's the part that we're talking about.
Like the remnants, basically.
The remnants. That's exactly it. Can't let that become chametz either. Now, ve'ema kulei lahachi hu da'asa. So now that we know that the word chelkam means the leftovers can't be, maybe that's the only thing that can't be made into chametz. Maybe the kmitza isn't a problem. So imkain, if that's true, lichtov chelkam lo se'afeh chametz. If that would have said that, what do you mean to tell me that we also learned that every part of the process you get a separate set of lashes for? So imkain lichtov chelkam lo se'afeh chametz. If it's only supposed to tell me that it's the portion that goes to the kohanim isn't allowed to become chametz, then the pasuk would have said chelkam, their portion you shall not bake it chametz. My lo se'afeh chametz chelkam. What does it mean when the pasuk says that you shall not bake into chametz their portion shmas mina tarti? That's what tells me it's both of those things. Lo se'afeh chametz means any portion of the process of making it into chametz is going to make me liable for malchus, and then also if I bake the leftover part that goes to the kohanim chametz, then I'm also liable. Ve'ema afia deparat lo rachmana lichayev chada inuch lichayev chada akulu. Well, one second. Why don't we look at it like this then? Since the Torah goes out of its way and specifies that if you bake it, you're liable, then why don't you explain it like this? If I bake the remnants as chametz, so that's going to get me liable for one prohibition. If I do any of the other actions, which is kneading, or if I shape it or I flatten it, so then that's all one. So if I knead it and I shape it, I'm going to be liable to one. If I then bake it, then I'm chayav a second time. Maybe that's what it's for. The answer is no, because we have a rule. Mishum dehava davar shay bechal v'yotzim nekal lelamed. We have a rule in the Torah that we read in the Rabbi Yishmael in the morning that says
morning Mishnah.
Sorry?
In the morning Mishnah.
That's correct. So we say that if I have something that the Torah already said is prohibited, and the Torah then goes out of its way and specifies it again, it's not telling me that that item itself is prohibited. It's teaching me something about the entire category. So therefore, lo lelamid al atzmo yotza, it's not telling me just that baking is prohibited. El lelamid al klal kulo yotza, it's coming to tell me something about the entire category. As we said, just like baking is going to be liable for one, so to everything in the category of making the bread is also going to be liable for a set of malchus. The ema, so maybe what we should say is lo se'aseh klal. Why don't we learn it? Why are you saying it's this? Why are we using this drasha? This drasha we're saying is called a davar shahaya bechlal. Why don't we call it a klal prat? Why don't we say lo se'aseh as a klal? Don't make it chametz. That's the generality. Lo se'afeh. Don't bake it. That's prat. That's telling me making isn't the issue. It's only baking. So therefore, klal prat, when I have a generalization and a specific, I'm only going to include that which is in the detail. So therefore, afia in, the only time I would get malchus according to that way of learning it is if I baked it. Midi achrini lo. But then kneading and shaping wouldn't be liability. So Amar Rab Abturiki, so Rab Abturiki says, Mishum dahavi klal prat meruchakim mizeh mizeh. Because you can't learn it that way. A klal prat works if the two parts are written next to each other in the Torah. These two parts are written 4 prakim apart, right? It says lo se'aseh chametz in parak beis of Vayikra, and then it says lo se'afeh chametz in parak vav. They're not even near each other. Kol klal prat hamruchakim zemizeh in danoso beklal prat. If they're not next to each other, they're not a klal prat. So this is not a klal prat. This is a davar. This is a davar shahaya bechlal v'yatzam min haklal l'lamed. It's not a klal prat. Meisiv Rav Ada bar Ava. So Rav Ada bar Ava asked the question. V'amri la kidi, and some people say that it was a anonymous source. Klal prat humuruchakin zemiza ein donin osan beklal prat. Right. If I've got a generalization and a specific, and the two psukim are far away from each other, I can't learn it as a generalization and a specific. Okay, but we learn in a brisa. That's not true. V'shachat oso b'makom asher yishchat es ha'olah lifnei Hashem chatas hu. So pasuk talks about this pasuk is talking about what happens when a leader, a nasi, does an avera. He's supposed to bring a chatos. Okay, but he's supposed to bring a bull as a chatos, but it's being offered like a regular chatos, except that a regular person brings a goat. So it says there.
Why is that goat supposed to, when it's a leader?
Leader, because pasuk says, bin parak daled, pasuk of daled, he's supposed to bring a different korban. So you're supposed to shachat oso, you're going to slaughter it in the place that you slaughtered the olah before Hashem. It is a chatos. Now, v'hechan olah nishchatas, where's an olah shechted? Bitzafon, in the northern part of the Azara, as we've learned, on the north side of the Mizbeach.
The courtyard area.
Yep, in the courtyard area. Afzeh bitzafon. So too, the chatos of the nasi is also brought in the north side. V'chi onu mikan lemedim. Is that the source? That the slaughtering of the, I'm sorry, it is a seer. No, it's not a bull. It's a goat. I was mistaken. It's a goat.
Even with
right?
the leader?
Even with the leader, it's a goat. It's a male goat, not a female goat. That's what it is, right? By everybody else, the female. And I knew there's a difference, but it's a male goat by the nasi. V'alo kvar namar, it already says by the chatos. The place that you shechted the olah, that's where you should slaughter a chatos. So therefore, every chatos we already know is supposed to be in the north. So ha lama zayatza. Why is it that this one goes out of its way to tell me again it's supposed to be done in the north? So the answer is lekov o sheim lo shachad oso betzafon psalo. In order to tell me a second time. And whenever we learn something in when it comes to korbanos, a second time, it means that it's required. It's ma'akev. It's required.
Mandatory.
It's mandatory. So therefore, if I don't do it in the north, it's puzzle. Ata omer lekach yatzos. You say that's what it's for. O ena ella shezet ta'on tzafon ve'ein acher ta'on tzafon. Maybe it goes the other way. Maybe it's a klal prat. Maybe the generality is all chatas be in the north, and then it says this one has to be in the north, which means only this one is in the north, not the other ones. Talmud Lomar, that can't be, because the pasuk says, "V'shachat es hachatas b'makom ha'ola b'mkom ha'ola." The pasuk says, by an individual's chatos, you're supposed to slaughter the chatos in the place of the Ola. Zeh bona'av. So now, this is telling me a general rule, l'kol chatos, for all of the chatos offerings, shetunos tzafon, they require to be shachted in the north. Okay, now, Tama, the only reason why we didn't say, we almost said it was a klal prat. We almost said there was a generalization that all chatos have to be done in the north, and then a specific by the nasi, it's done in the north. And we almost learned that, except for the fact because of Rachmana, the Torah went out of its way by v'shachat es hachatos, that we're going to slaughter the chatos of the individual person in the place of the olah. Halav hachi, but if it were not for that pasuk, havamina shezet ta'on tzafon ve'ein acher ta'on tzafon, that we would have in fact learned it as just the nasi, the korban of the nasi requires the north, not anybody else. My timer, why would we be saying that? Lav mishom dehava klal uprat. Isn't it because it would be considered a generalization and a specific? Even though the two psukim that we're dealing with here, one is in Perek Aleph and one is in Perek Vav, they're very far away from each other. So, nevertheless, we would learn klal prat. So that shows you that you can learn a klal prat even if the two psukim are far away from each other. Dan and Osan, klal prat. Maskif law. Maskif law Ravashi asks on that. Hi klal prathu. That's not because there's a klal prat. It's prat uklalhu. There's a specific and then the generalization. Why? Because the nasi's korban is actually listed first before the others. So
that's why
so therefore the specific comes first. So nasa klal mosif ala prat. What we would say is if you've got a prat klal, the generalization comes to add on everything. V'srabi lukul mili. It wouldn't specify. It wouldn't limit everything. It would only increase everything. So therefore, what would be the reason to think that only the nasi's korban would require the north? If it was really being learned that way, it would be a prat klal, and I would include everything. Ella Tana oso kakashale. Rather, the reason is it has nothing to do with prat klal. It has nothing to do with klal prat. It has to do with the fact that by the seer nasi, the nasi's goat, it says the word v'shachat oso. You should shecht it. Usually, the word it is a limiter, and it's telling me that hachikamer. This is what it's telling me. O eino ella ta'on safon ve'ein acher ta'on safon. I might have thought that because it says oso, only this korban is the only one that needs north because of Rahman oso, because it says north. So therefore, they say, no. It's because there's another pasuk, and we say that it tells us that really all the korbanos have to be north. Okay. V'ashted nafgalei v'shachat es hachatos. Now that we've told me that, okay, in the end, all chatos have to be done in the north, oso l'mutei mai. Then what is the point of writing the Torah writing oso it by the nasi's korban? It's excluding something. What is it excluding? So l'mutei nachshon v'shachat of bepesach. Simon. That we're going to learn. We're talking about nachshon, slaughtering birds, and pesach in a moment. So oso it is bitzafon ve'ein seir nachshon bitzafon. You're right. All korbanos chatos are supposed to be brought in the north, but there is one exception. That is the goat that Nachshon brought, Nachshon ben Aminadav.
What was the exception?
Because his korban, was a korban of the nasi that they brought when they were establishing the Mishkan for the first time. That korban that type of korban never happens ever again in history. It was a one-time korban, so it's different than all the other chatos. Chatos for all generations has to be done in the north. Nachshon's chatos, since it was an unusual korban that was only brought one time. Why? It's also different because it doesn't come for an Aveira. It's a chatos, which is a gift. We never see a chatos, which is a gift. Chatos come because I did something, I have to bring a chatos.
Was it male goat as well that he gave?
Sorry?
Was it a male goat that he gave?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, that's true too. Salka daita chamin. I would have thought, Hovis Rabbi le'inyan smicha. I would have thought that since the korban of Nachshon is included in the mitzvah of smicha, so which is done before the shchita. So lis Rabbi nami tzafon, I might have thought, okay, well, this is going to be like a korban, any other type of korban in the future. So kamash malan. So therefore, the answer is no. Nachshon's korban did not need to be done in the north. Usmicha gufa minolan. Where do you know that smicha, the leaning on the animal, is supposed to be done? Titania, we're in a brisa. The samach yodol rosha seir. Right? It says by the seir, the goat of the nasi, if he does an aveira, so he's supposed to lean on the head of the goat. The Rabos, so it says, V'samach yodo al rosh ha'sa'ir. It should just say al rosho, on its head. Why does it have to say on the head of the goat? The Rabos ir nachshon l'smicha, to tell me that there's another goat that a leader brings, nachshon's goat, and that's also going to require smicha. They're going to also have to lean on that one. Div Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Shimon says, L'Rabos se'ire avodos kochavim. We're going to include that the goat that is being brought for by a beis din that teaches that avodah zarah is permissible, the smicha, that one also needs to have leaning. So therefore, we have going to include those for smicha, but they don't need to be what's called doesn't need to be shechted in the north. Maskif lo Ravina. So Ravina says, Tinach lo Rabbi Yehuda. I get according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Shimon, Michael Meimar. But according to Rabbi Shimon, right? So he says, look, if it's coming, so then there's no reason for me to think that Nachshon's korban didn't have smicha, because the smicha is talking about the korban for idolatry. So therefore, if Nachshon's korban didn't have smicha, why would you think that its shechita has to be in the north? So Amrle Marzutra Brei de Rav Mori l'Ravina. So Marzutra, the son of Rav Mori, said to Ravina, Rabbi Yehuda, Nami, my dis Rabbi is Rabbi, my delois Rabbi, lois Rabbi. Well, no, because Rabbi Yehuda says, look, whatever the Torah says is the rule by Nachshon's korban, that's what's included. You don't take anything for granted. It's a korban that never exists in any other place. If it doesn't say to do smicha, then you don't do smicha. It doesn't say to do shechita in the north, you don't do shechita in the north. V'chitema ilomate kra havamina teisei bebinyanav. Well, you might have thought that if the pasuk didn't tell me not to do it, that I would have thought, hey, it's a chatos. So therefore, it should come like every other chatos. So smicha gufei. So smicha gufa. So then by smicha also, right? Why does it also have to be done by the goat of Nachshon? Lishto kromine v'teisi b'minyanav. Shouldn't have said anything, and then I would have presumed, hey, it's a korban chatos, just like every other korban chatos does smicha. So to Nachshons they did smicha. Ella, so rather, sha'a midoros lo yafinon. The answer is, we wouldn't be able to make a comparison to Nachshon's korban because it was only a one-time thing. You couldn't learn all the other korbanos in the future from a one-time thing. So it's not, so hachanami, so here too, sha'a midoros lo yalfinon. The seer Nachshon, right, that was taught for the one time. So then why would we, again, we're stuck. Why would we presume that the shechita will be in the north? That the Torah has to tell me it wasn't done in the north. Ella oso ton tzafon ve'na shochet omei b'tzafon. So you're right. It's not coming to exclude the korban of Nachshon, because we already would exclude the korban of Nachshon. There's no reason to assume it to be included. So rather, what is oso about the shechita? It means that the animal has to be in the north when you do the shechita, but the person doing the shechita does not need to be in the north. So 1 second. That's not from there. That's Rabbi Chia nafka. That we know from Rabbi Chia taught us. The Tanya when Rabbi Chia says, "V'shachad oso al yerach hamizbeach tzafona." You're supposed to slaughter the korban ola on the side of the mizbeach, the north side. Matamad lomar. What does it come in to tell me? I already know that the person who's catching the blood, he stands in the north and he catches the blood in the north, right? Because the pasuk says, right, that the Kabbalah and the Shechit that has to be done in the north. So therefore, there's the Kabbalah and the Shechit are together. If he stands in the south and he catches the blood in the north, it's possible. So king, I might think that Shechita is the same way, right? If we're going to learn it from the Kabbalah, so then Shechita would be the same way. Talmud Lomar Oso. Therefore, it says Oso. Oso b'tzafon. Only Shechita, only the animal has to be done in the north. But the Kohen doing the Shechita does not need to stand in the north. Okay, Ella. Oso b'tzafon ve'ein ben of b'tzafon. How about another version of what comes from Oso? Oso tells me that it needs to be done in the north, but a bird, the malika of a bird, does not need to be done in the north, right? Because even though it's a chatos, the chatos of a bird, we said, was done on the mizbeach. They were standing on the mizbeach. They weren't on the north side. Salkadai tachamina. I would have thought leisi bekavachomer mi benson that I would for sure have to bring I would for sure have to do the bird in the north side as a kavachomer from an animal. Ma benson shelo kavalo kohen kavalo tzafon. If I'm slaughtering an animal, Shechita doesn't have to be done by a Kohen. We're in that Shechita is kosher by a non-Kohen. And yet, it still has to be done in the north. Ben Oaf, when it comes to a bird, Shari Karva lo Kohen. A bird has to have Malika done by a Kohen. It's a service. So Eino Din, Shenikba lo B'tzafon. So for sure it has to be done in the north. So, not true. The Oso tells me that it's not done in the north. So Ma lebentzon kava lo kli. Yeah, but how can you learn from a bird? We know that by an animal you need to catch the blood in a utensil. Birds are completely different because you don't have to catch the blood in a utensil. So therefore, birds are different. I wouldn't presume that a bird has to be done in the north just because animals are. Birds and animals are completely different things. Ella oso b'tzafon ve'ein pesach b'tzafon. So another explanation is maybe it needs to be done in the north, right? The seer of the nasi has to be done in the north, but a korban pesach does not need to be slaughtered in the north. So pesach, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov nafka. So what are you talking about? The Korban Pesach, since we're talking about Pesach a lot, Korban Pesach, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, he learns that you don't need it to be done north from another place. The Tanya, we learn in Brisa. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov and Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, Yochu Yehei Pesach ton tzafon. And you might think that the Korban Pesach has to be slaughtered in the north. V'dinhu, there's a logic to that. Uma ola shelo kava lozman b'shchita sa. An ola doesn't have a set time to do the shchita. Kava latzafon, nevertheless, it is established in the north. Pesach shekava lozman l'shchita so. A Korban Pesach has a very specific time to do the shchita. Eino din shekava latzafon. For sure, it needs to be done in the north. So mala ola shekain kalil. Yeah, but I'll show you why you can't learn that kavachomer, because maybe the ola is greater because the ola is completely burnt and Pesach is not completely burnt. So okay, mechatos. Let's try to learn it from the chatos. So the chatos, malachatos. So what? May the chatos has to be done in the north. So for sure Pesach does. Yeah, but malachatos shekim echaperes achave krisos. The chatos is more serious. That's why it has to be done in the north, because it atones for sins that a person would be chayv kares for if he doesn't get an atonement. So the answer is me'asham. Let's see if it's from the Asham sacrifice. That the Asham has to be brought in the north. For sure, a Korban Pesach has to be brought in the north. Yeah, but Mala Asham Shekain Kadshe Kachin. Asham is the Holy of Holies offerings. And by the way, Bikulu Nami Shekain Kadshe Kachin. We could have said that about the Ola or the Chatas as well. These are all offerings that are Holy of Holies, whereas a Korban Pesach is not in that same category, as we know. Korban Pesach can be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim. It doesn't need to be eaten in the Azara, so it has more leniencies. Ella, so rather, we're going to go back, and we're going to say, Kidek Kamrina Meikar, we're going to go back to the answer we gave at first. Oso b'tzafon ve'ein hashoche b'tzafon, that the animal needs to be in the north, but the person shechting it doesn't need to be in the north. Udeka kashalach, what was your question on that? Bid Rabbi Chia nafka, that we learned that from a different pasuk. Rabbi Chia says that. So, to Rabbi Chia, lav l'muti shochet b'tzafon hu da'asa, that Rabbi Achia was not coming to tell me that the person who does the slaughtering doesn't have to be in the north. This is what he means to say. He means to say that the person who's doing the slaughtering doesn't have to be in the north, but the person who's catching the blood does indeed need to be in the north. Why? Mekabel, the person who's catching the blood, is mi lakach v'lakach nafka. He learns it from the fact that Pasuk says that you're supposed to shecht it in the place that you shecht the ola. V'lakacha kohen, you're supposed to catch the blood. The kohen's supposed to catch it. And of extra vav tells me that it has to be done, that the Kabbalah Saddam has to be done in the north. Okay. Lakach v'lak, and okay. So now, so therefore the question is, why do we have to do oso if we already know that, why are we worrying from oso to teach me about these, to remove other types of korbanos from being done in the north, the other type of chatas from being done in the north? So the answer is lakach v'lakach, lo mi boili. Rabbi Achia, right, he doesn't learn this lakach and the extra vav of lakach. Therefore, he says that that the person who's catching the blood does have to stand in the north, and therefore he uses the oso to tell me one of the other korbanos chatos, one of the other chatos offerings doesn't have to be brought in the north. Okay, now let's talk about the mincha. Back to the mincha. You're going to be liable if you knead it, if you shape it, and if you bake it. Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, Afa lo kishaim. If you bake the bread, you're going to be liable 2 sets of malchus. Achas ala richasa. Why? Because part of the baking process, when you put it in the oven, you have to reset it. So therefore, since you have to set it and bake it, you're being liable for both when you bake it. One time for setting it, one time for baking it. You said that baking was an individual action. She be liable by itself. So therefore, you're not going to be liable also for the setting. If you bake it, you're only liable for the one. So no, lo kasha. That's not a contradiction. The brisa, which says you're going to be liable only one malchus, so that's where one person is doing the whole thing by himself. So therefore, he's going to be liable twice because he did the shaping and he did the baking, right? So therefore, it's its own action. But if his friend is with him, Rav Papa is saying that you're going to be liable to two when his friend prepared the dough in chametz, and then he gave it to him, and he bakes it in chametz. At that point, his friend is going to be liable for one because he prepared the chametz. He's going to be liable two, one for the baking and one for the setting of it. So, since the baking is the end of the setting,
would his friend have some sort of chayav?
Yes, his friend's going to be also chayav also for making the dough and kneading it. So he's going to be liable for both actions. Right, but if he's doing it by himself, he set the dough and now he's baking it. You can't then be mechayev him a second time for setting it when he bakes it, because he already got lashes for baking it, right? It's only when he's by himself and somebody else shaped it that he bakes it, he's going to be liable for two, for the shaping and the baking. Okay, Tana Rabbanan, Rabbi's learned. Bechor she'achsu dam, let's say I have a firstborn animal and it's getting sick. And what's happening is it's got swelling, blood swelling, and we know that if we don't relieve the pressure, the animal's going to die. However, it's a bechor. There's a prohibition against making a blemish on a bechor, because when the bechor is a tam, has no blemishes, so then it can be a korban.
The blood clot is a...
Oh, so that's the question. Is the blood clot going to be a wound in itself? It doesn't necessarily fall into the category. So, court opinion number one, makizano so es adam b'makom shein osin bomum. We're going to take some of the blood out in a location. We're trying to find some place that limb doesn't make it, that mark doesn't make it a balmum. Okay, that's answer number one. The ein mazikin makizin asadam b'makom shosam. You can't, if the place is a place that's going to establish a blemish, so then it's not going to heal, then you can't do it.
So you just let it suffer and die.
That's what it seems like. Yep. Even if it's going to die, you can't. So there's a losa say I can't do it. Divrei Rabbi so Rabbi says. The Chacham disagree. Yakiz af b'makom she'osim bomum. You're allowed to take the blood out, even if, and heal the animal, even if you're going to make a blemish. However, the only thing is that you can't do shchita. That can't be your blemish, right? In other words, oh, great, I've got a blood swelling here, so I'm going to do shchita in order to relieve the blood. You can't do that because it's not a balmum yet when you do the shchita, and so it's not able to be eaten in that circumstance. You've got to wait till the blemish happens. Rabbi Shimon says on Nun Vavam and Beis, nishchat al oso mum. He says, af nishchat al oso mum. You can even do shchita, right, in order to, because of this blemish itself. This blemish, as you asked, Yehuda, maybe the blemish itself is a mum. Yeah, the blemish is a mum. So therefore I can do shchita and just eat it the way that it is. Rabbi Yehuda says, afilu meis, even if it dies, ein makizin lo es adam, you are not allowed to take the blood out. Even if it's going to die. Because people are worried about the finance here, right? They're thinking, great, I can make a mum on the animal and I can now eat it. So he's got a big benefit here. So therefore, even though he might have been able to remove the blood in a way that wouldn't cause a blemish, he's going to take advantage of the situation. He's going to make a blemish. Okay. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said the name Rabbi Yochanan. Hakol modim b'mechametz acher mechametz she hu chayav. Everyone agrees that if I have a mincha that once it's already become chametz, right, with some kind of action, right? For example, he kneaded the dough, right, and now with it's and it's chametz, so he's going to be liable. Then if he bakes it, he's going to be liable. So because the pasuk says lo se'aseh chametz, can't make it chametz. Lo se'afeh chametz, it says you can't bake it chametz. So therefore, you're going to be chayav on every single action. B'misares achar misares. Okay, well, you know what? Let's stop here. We'll pick this up next time. Okay?
Oh.
Yeah, we'll pick this up from tomorrow.
All right.
Go back a little bit also. Not involved in the base.